Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Iron Age Marketing. I'm here, as always, Nicky P. Today's guest, we have Tim Emholt. Why don't you give us an introduction to yourself, Tim?
Hi. So, my professional career has been a little bit scattered. When I got out of high school, I actually was in the Army for a bit. Got out of the Army, went to college, got my PhD in physics. Went to work after my PhD, wound up working with the fine folks at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in between some stuff in the Department of Physics, the Institute for Soldering Nanotechnologies, which is primarily where I was, occasionally over at Lincoln Labs, doing some of the more classified oriented stuff. Then wound up leaving there, went over to a large defense contractor, and I was involved in the upgrade to the battle management system to the Patriot missile system. Because at the time, the Patriot missile system was still using and or chips inside of it instead of using something that was created in at least the last decade of the 20th century. It's now been very updated, so it's nowhere near what it was. It's much, much, much better. Left there, went to work with some venture guys. I was doing some consulting work for a bit because I realized you can buy things with money. And I have 3 kids that someday want to go to school. So, you do eventually have to go and sort of grow up, as they say, and do something responsible. Got the chance to start my own company a couple of years ago. We're on year 3.5 now, I think. But what a physicist really does is we don't go in the lab and take data anymore. We design experiments, sure, but we're not going to sit in a lab and write down data. Computers take it all, right? Nobody does that anymore. Once the computers take it, somebody has to analyze it, and then you have to figure out what that data set tells you. So my primary expertise was in a field called predictive analytics, where you take giant piles of data and try to figure out what it all means and where it's going to go, right? What influences are on it that sends it some direction or another. Which is now largely being called artificial intelligence, which 20 years ago was called predictive analytics. Figure out whatever you want to call it. But it basically takes messy data sets and tries to find patterns inside those messy data sets, which is important to marketing. And we'll get to that part in a minute. Because if you don't know what your data is telling you, it's almost impossible for you to make active decisions on it. Right? So you can get as messy a data set as you want, and a scientist can hopefully sit down and figure out how to do it. That's kind of where I spent most of my career. Hope that answers your question in a really long-winded kind of fashion.
No, it does. So you're someone who appreciates, the numbers tell you what the numbers tell you, even if your eyes are wrong.
Yeah, I never try to go into a data set and say, okay, here's what this data is telling me. I'm like, okay, here's the data. Let's figure it out, right? And so often people will look at like a statistic on the news or something and go, oh, it means this. Okay, what data got you to that answer? And can I see how you analyzed it? Because, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? So if we look at data sets properly and understand that no data set exists in an isolation, at least in the real world. Take economics, for instance, right? You always look at these economic numbers and people are like, oh, inflation, but it excludes food and fuel and residence. Well, that's not really an inflation number that matters to most people, right? That's a number that nobody cares about, right? That's how we keep it down to 2%. But in the predictive analytic field, and you might ask how that pertains to marketing, what we've done is at my company, we've applied it to the social media space. And what we can do now is we can analyze the large slush pile of stuff that comes out of social media to figure out what hashtags people are viewing most often and what hashtags people will be viewing across the next couple of hours. And get those hashtags set properly on people's posts so that they can get the maximum viewership and engagement possible. So we took a big science project and applied it to social media and built a whole app out of it that actually works pretty well to get decent engagement rates on social media. And if you want to grow, engagement's the key, right? You've got to have an active, engaged audience.
I argue with people all the time. It's like, it's all well and good that you keep hitting repost on this, but it'd be even better is if you commented on it and said something so people might actually get a chance to see it, because we all know the algorithm doesn't care if they don't.
It does actually like quote posts even better, though. The repost, it doesn't care about quite as much, but a quote post, it cares about a lot more.
Yeah. Well, once again, it's the active engagement that they're looking for, not the, so just the reposting is the same thing as like a like. It's just a, I don't know, vanity, I guess.
And I see all this stuff lately with people like, oh, I have 100,000 followers, or worse, I get direct message of people trying to sell me followers. Which, by the way, if anybody ever tries to buy followers, please don't. It's the worst idea in the history of like anything.
It doesn't serve you. It doesn't serve you as a person because it's like a qualified versus an unqualified lead. That's the most unqualified you could possibly get.
And they're usually coming out of bot farms in South America or India, someplace. So the point is that engaged following really matters. And like here I am, a goofy scientist talking about sci-fi books, Dungeons and Dragons, and my kids, and I've got almost 12,200 on Twitter alone. And a year and a half ago, I was at like 1,800. Right. So if I can grow, anybody can do it. You've just got to have something out there that you want to talk about, that you're passionate about, and then you got to get those hashtags set properly. Once all that's done, you will grow. It does happen.
Well, well, so we kind of glossed over it a little bit there. We covered the fact, you're a scientist. Yeah, that's background of this. But here I am. I talk to creators about marketing their books. And how did you get to the world where you decided to make something to help people in that field?
Well, I've actually written 7 fiction novels myself. So with my career, everybody's like, "Oh, where'd you find the time?" I'm like, I get bored really easy, so I have to go find stuff to do. And I started writing books when my now ex-wife was traveling back and forth to Japan for work. And at the time, I had 2 kids below the age of 4 at home, so it was like I can't, once they go to bed, there's nothing to do, and they go to bed at like 7. So what are you going to do, right? So I read. I've been a active. I've been a sort of a voracious reader my entire life, and wound up as a subject matter expert for an A-list author on a book called Zero Day by David Baldacci. And I got the chance to kind of talk to him about his process, and I complained. I'm like, there's no books, Leo, like this that are out there. I really want to read a book like that. He goes, well, shut the hell up and write one. I was like, huh, okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. So I did, and now 7 books later, what I've realized is that the hardest part about a book is not writing it; it's marketing it. So I looked around at the apps that were on the market to help you do that, especially in a social media case, because let's face it, as a book writer, I'm not buying TV ads, right? I'm not buying big magazine ads. I'm buying social media space. Um, so I looked around at the products that were on the market to do that, and I kind of stopped and went, these are all shockingly expensive for individual creators. I mean, they're $150, $250, $500 a month. Take your Hootsuites and your Sprout socials, and they're 200, 250, 500 a month. Some of them are 750. And what's an indie author expect to make a month? A couple $100, right? Sort of at most.
If they're really, really working hard.
Yeah, well, I do. I probably pull in 300-400 a month pretty consistently. So I've sold 25,000 copies now. I'm at 4.5 million pages on Kindle Unlimited. So I've done pretty well, but it's because of the tool that I built that I've done well. It's not because of me. But those tools were expensive. So I wanted to build a tool that actually worked well because I tried some of those tools and they were really clunky and I didn't really like them very much. So I went out and built one and said, hey, look, here's a tool for $25 a month, right? You can use it. And has basically all the same features they've got, which I don't understand how they're getting away with charging the rates they are. We even built out mobile apps on iOS and Android so you can use it mobilely. But it works with all the leading platforms. We're going to add Threads pretty soon. That's in the next month or two. But the 7 leading platforms we're on already. And the hashtag tool is a proprietary internal AI we use that basically analyzes the platforms you're posting to, reads your post, and says, here's the best hashtags to use with your post. And it's smart enough to say, hey, look, if you're like the other day, I was posting something that had Germany and France in it for some reason. I forget what it was. And it came up and said, oh, no, hashtag Europe. Right? Well, Europe was nowhere in my post, right? So the system is smart enough to know that you're talking about something in Europe, and it goes off and finds words that are semantically correct, and then gives you a ranking based on how many people are viewing that post or will view that post in the next couple of hours. And as a result, I get this week alone, I think I've had 500,000 impressions on Twitter alone. I can't call it X. I refuse to call it X. but I've had 550,000 impressions on YouTube alone with an engagement rate over 6%. And the Twitter system wide average is 0.05. On YouTube, I'm pulling 15% engagement, 16% engagement, and I'm gaining followers steadily. So what that engaged following lets you do is find people whose interest is the same as yours, or whatever your post is, and they will eventually follow you. And you will over time gain followers. You're not going to see a spike, but you'll see a consistent rise. So I'm getting, a couple percent rise a month.
And that's a thing that I think people misconstrue about marketing in the broad scheme. It's like a good marketer will tell you up front nothing that they do is going to work immediately. It's all about setting things up that over time the algorithms learn to like you. They learn what you're about. They learn how to best serve the people that you want to connect with. And as long as that connection makes sense and it works, the algorithm will keep doing that forever. The problem is that people try to do things to game the algorithm. And when they game the algorithm, it means it's giving bad data to its users. And it never wants to do that.
And I could tell you from experience, because we analyze every single one of those algorithms all the time. So we have tools that actually go out and analyze those algorithms constantly. And they're catching on to that, right? So if you're gaming the algorithm, there's now tools in there to say, it'll flip a trigger and say, oh, you're gaming the algorithm. It'll start to massively downgrade your account. So it actually also has, at least X now has a sentiment analyzer in it. So if your responses to your posts are always largely negative, like people coming in telling you're an idiot and all this, it'll actually start to downgrade you as well. So if you're rage baiting, you're throwing stuff out there just to make people angry, it's not working the way it once did. It's actually going to hurt you in the long run. Which that one I kind of appreciate, to be honest. So.
Oh, I can barely wrap my head around that one. It's like that's not the most of the internet.
Well, I mean,
sure feels that way.
Pick on Elon all you want, but that one's actually kind of a good idea, right? So,
you mean my people aren't going to be pissed off every time they're on here?
Oh, I'm telling you, I had one this morning. I looked at a post the other day from Mr. Beast of all people. He built 100 homes for the blind, and people kind of went after him, like, "Oh my God, why is he doing this? Somebody else should do it. Government, why does a YouTuber do this? Why doesn't somebody else?" I'm like, "How about somebody tells the 26-year-old kid that just built 100 homes for the blind, thank you." Instead of like going out and trying to fry him, right? That doesn't make any sense to me. But